Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. We really appreciate it. This is the first of our sort of 4 virtual trade missions taking place over the next week or so. Today, we'll be focusing on the continent of Africa. And the aim of these virtual trade missions is essentially to equip games companies, mostly in the UK, I expect, with invaluable insights into doing business in foreign markets and exporting their games, and essentially sort of understanding more about the landscape, both from a business perspective and also a consumer perspective. So my name's Leo. I work for Ukie, part of the membership team here at Ukie. If you have any issues during this session, please pop them in the chat. Let me know. Do want to run through a couple of housekeeping notes. Be really grateful if you can add any questions during this session into the Q&A box, and we'll either read these out at the end of each respective session or allow the hosts to answer them on the go, ad hoc, if they can multitask. So yeah, if we can avoid using the sort of chat that I've unhelpfully started using already, that would be fantastic, because the Q&A box allows people to sort of mark questions as being answered and keep track of things. So yeah, I mentioned first of 4 virtual trade missions. So tomorrow we'll be looking at Brazil. Wednesday we'll be looking at China. And on Monday next week, we'll be looking at UAE. So yeah, lots of exciting stuff to look forward to. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome today's first panelist, Marie Shabaya from Maliyo Games, sorry, from Maliyo Games. Marie's going to talk us through findings from the latest Africa Games Industry Report. So, Marie, do you want to sort of introduce yourself? And oh, hello, yes, you're on screen. Thank you. I'll let you take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Leo. Well, it's great to be here and just speaking on behalf of Maliyo Games on one of our projects that we launched late last year, just giving, external audiences a broader view of what the African games industry looks like and the emerging ecosystem that's coming up. Getting several stakeholder groups, including policymakers, investors, game developers in and outside of the continent, as well as the general public, a better view of what is happening in African game development. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today. I'm the marketing and communication lead at Maliyo Games. We're a Pan-African game developer based out of Lagos, Nigeria, but we have staff all across the continent, including Nairobi, Kenya, where I'm based, South Africa, in Cameroon, and all over the continent. So it's great to be here. Let me just launch my slides here for you. See my screen? All right, so we're going to be talking about kind of like an overview of the African Games Industry Report. As I mentioned, we launched our first edition late last year around this time, and we're coming up with the 2005 edition very shortly next month. So just an overview about the report. We were looking to fill a huge knowledge and information gap that was glaring when we went forth and set about work on the report last year. Across various different games ecosystems and industries such as Turkey, Brazil, there was a comprehensive annual report about the industry in that region, but there was nothing similar talking about the African games industry at large, and really any milestones that have been met, and really painting a picture for external audiences on the game development landscape on the continent. So we came together to build this report last year, and it's intended for industry stakeholders, as I mentioned, such as investors, policymakers, game development studios, independent developers, as well as members of the general public interested in learning more about this African industry. We offer insight and analysis on various sectors of the African games industry. We also provide recommendations to policymakers, as well as insights for investors or anyone looking to put money in this industry, on where the points of growth are and an overview of what the business and games looks like in Africa. So we look at game development as a business, as a potential economic driver, and games themselves from Africa as a major cultural product, as you would say film and music and other cultural products that have done well from Africa across the board. We also look at best practices from major emerging markets within the games industry globally, such as India, Turkey, and other key markets. And again, we offer key recommendations for growth. So as I mentioned, last year was our inaugural edition, and we're coming up with our second edition this year. So overall, we got some great reception from the inaugural African Games industry report. We've had over 5,000 downloads since we launched in December last year. And one of the things that we noticed is that we got interest from, well over 15 major industry leaders, including Disney, Scopely, Google, UN Development Program, UNDP, Electronic Art, the US State Department, Supercell, Google, just showing that this information was needed and wanted. There's a hunger for this information and analysis and insight. So the reception really pointed us in this direction. We also presented major findings from the report in major industry conferences last year and this year, including the Game Developer Conference in GBC in San Francisco, EASCOM in Cologne, Germany. Very recently, the Indian Developer Conference in Hyderabad, Mobility in Turkey, as well as Games for Change in New York City. So again, various audiences were interested in this insight and wanted to get a broader view of what was happening in African games, how can they support African game makers, and what is already there. So really interesting to see the great reception we got. This year's report is launching next month at Africa Games Week in Cape Town. So I hope you'll then if you're in the area. If not, you can also access a soft copy of the report via our website. I'll provide the details on that as of the 1st of December, 2024. All right. So here's some key insights from last year's report. And one of the starting off points that we had was that, we have this market with huge potential, growing youth population in Africa, one of the youngest continents in the world, as well as a growing population. So we saw that, the African population is really growing and set to double by 2050. That means we're going to have a large number of consumers in the next few decades. And that really places the continent with huge potential in increased purchasing power for a number of global consumer products and services, and amongst that is games. And we saw games, especially from the continent, as a huge commercial opportunity and a conduit for new cultural products coming from Africa, offering opportunities for gamers to show off and tell new African stories, but also at the same time building, providing employment opportunities for people within the creative sectors, as well as game developers, technical talent from the industry. So games really provided a major economic opportunity for anyone who was interested. So we also have a large growing population of African players, and ongoing industry initiatives such as Game of Africa, the game development courses offered at SHS University, the art fellowship offered by Africa on COD, um, are helping to transition this group that are mostly playing games into more active contributors and players within the African games industry to become developers as opposed to players. And we've seen that not just anecdotally, but in real life from our experience at Maliyo Games. A majority of our developers were formerly players that we trained through one of our initiatives called Game Africa. So we're seeing huge potential here. So last year's report really highlighted the transition from it just being kind of a niche sector into being a major economic powerhouse if the conditions are set right. In last year's report, we also included what we're dubbing the African Game Developer Survey. We spoke to close to 200 African game developers, understanding conditions that they're facing in their day-to-day work, in building their studios and building their games, and majorly some of the pain points that they're experiencing in growing their studio, their projects, and finding financing, and also just building games in Africa. What does that look like? So one of the things that we learned is this, under 20% of the respondents got some form of external funding or investment in their gaming project. And of those, 57% managed to raise less than $100,000. And that's quite startling. It's a story that continues on to this year, to this point in time. We're seeing that, investment and access to funding and capital is quite difficult for this group of African entrepreneurs and game makers. We also see kind of like a significant shortfall when it comes to industry associations, which are there. We highlight them in the report, but we need kind of wider reach, wider advocacy across the board for this group of entrepreneurs and developers. Understanding that they need to have a more stronger collaborative community around them. Outside of the fact that that their governments aren't supporting or funding this sector because it's still quite new and burgeoning. So we need more community initiative and support across the board to support African developers. Infrastructural issues also played a huge part in kind of holding back a lot of African game developers. Power supply is a big issue. Internet access is a big issue. And these continue to play a part in kind of barriers to growth, barriers to entry formally into this industry. And 52% of them indicated that their income originated from outside their place of residence. So a lot of their income is coming either from outside the continent or immediately from outside the country which they reside, which links to the lack of government support, et cetera, et cetera. So a sneak peek into this year's report will have kind of like the same elements, looking at just an overview of, again, the African games industry, where we are now, from where we started. We'll also do an overview of the global games industry, and we'll look into movements in emerging markets, as well as offer initiatives that are growing the industry and highlighting initiatives that are bringing the community together, developing talent pipelines within the African industry. But we're also going to do a deeper dive this year on major African game markets, and including major analysis on regional powerhouses that are emerging, and that is South Africa, Nigeria, and Morocco. We're also going to do a spotlight of major African studios, as well as highlighting their work. And we'll also include this year a comprehensive studio directory that will allow you to understand who is who in each country and region. We'll also do kind of a showcase of major releases, game releases from African developers in 2024. And we'll also do some more insights and analysis from this year's 2024 African Game Developer Survey, comparing the results this year from last year's, and also understanding what remains a challenge for this group of entrepreneurs and game makers, and how can we better support them as stakeholder groups within the industry. So the different ways in which you can get involved, I think I've already mentioned, you can definitely grab your copy of the report as soon as it's live out of the press on the 1st of December 2024. On our website, africagamesreport.com. You can partner with us. You can invite us to speak at your event and share our findings, both from this year and last. And also we can collaborate to create future editions of the report. You can also attend the 2025 report launch at Africa Games Week in Cape Town this December. And you can also sponsor the report and help us make next year's edition bigger and better. Right now, Maliyo Games is the only kind of company that is backing the report. We'd love more partners, so get in touch so we can talk more about how we can improve this product on the African gaming industry. With that, I'm going to end my very brief presentation. I want to thank you. You can get in touch with me at marie.shabaya@video.com. You can also download the report and sign up to get next year's this upcoming report at africagamesreport.com. So that's where we are, and thank you for listening.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Marie. Really appreciate it. Any questions from anyone at all in the chat? More than welcome to put them in the box, put them in the Q&A. We'll have some time for questions towards the end as well. Do bear with me 1 second. I do apologise, everyone. I actually lost internet connectivity just then. So yes, we'll. Bukola and Barene, are you around at all?
Yes, we are.
Fantastic, wonderful. Are you pretty much ready to go?
Yep. Yes.
Great. Marie, would you all right to stop sharing your screen by any chance?
All right.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Marie. I really appreciate it. Yes, delighted to welcome Bukola and Barene. Do you guys want to introduce yourselves and maybe sort of talk a little bit about what you're going to present today?
Sure. We'll kind of follow the slides as well. We'll introduce ourselves as we progress. So hi, everyone. Today, our session is about Decoding Africa. We hope that at the end of this session, you'd have a better understanding of the markets on the continent, media landscapes, consumer behavior, culture, in a way that hopefully helps you shape your decision-making as you progress on your path of discovery. So hi, my name is Bukola Akingbade, and I'm the founder and CEO of Kucheza Gaming. I'll speak a little bit about Kucheza in the next slide. I am married, I have 3 boys. I'm a coffee lover, specifically double French. My favorite game is Monument Valley by far. I've got 15 years marketing experience, but in 2019, I started Kucheza, a video game studio, and I work closely with Barene, helping companies better understand the continent as part of Gestalt consulting. Barene, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Thanks, Ukie. Good afternoon, everyone. So yes, my name is Barene Jankovich-Besan. And that very long surname is all inherited from my husband. None of it is mine, just in case you were wondering. I'm a runner who loves traveling and any novel experience. So I've actually traveled to 20 of the countries in Africa and worked in 12 of those. I'm a consumer behavior scientist at heart, and I don't drink coffee at all.
Thanks, Lorraine. Okay, let's read about Kucheza Gaming. Kucheza is a Swahili word that means play or to play. We're a Lagos-based studio utilizing the power of video games for youth development and empowerment. We released our first mobile game last year called The Wild Kingdoms Iton Orisha. It's based on Yoruba mythology. We're having a remastered version for iOS released later this year. We're the first and only Unreal Engine authorized training center in West Africa. And we got selected as one of 3 studios to work on a global IP. I'd like to, yes, Barene, over to you, please.
Thanks, Bukie. So I'm going to start with the pop quiz, and I'm going to ask you to please drop your answers in the chat. So my question is, and I'm not sure how familiar you are with Africa, but which of these do you think is the top streaming platform in Africa? Prime, Showmax, Disney, Netflix, Apple TV, or DSTV Stream? I look forward to seeing your answers in the chat. Which one do you think is the top streaming platform? Take a chance. It's deadly quiet in the chat. Aha. Chris says Showmax. Another Chris says Netflix. Anybody else want to hesitate a guess? Another Netflix. Thanks, Mel. Okay. Thanks for those who you responded. The answer is actually Showmax. And one of the reasons, so Showmax actually overtook Netflix a while ago. And one of the reasons Showmax is so successful is because of the focus on local content. They've got a very, very strong focus on local content. And it's just one of those things, as we're all aware of. It's always nice to see people that look like you and live in a context that's similar to your own. So thanks, everyone, for that. Okay, so if you look at Africa, it often can be portrayed as hugely complex, and it's not surprising because you've got 54 countries, you've got 3,000 plus languages. However, depending on the perspective you take, it's quite easy to sort of simplify it and break it down into sort of different perspectives. So the first one is if you look at it from a size of economy perspective, there are 4 large economies, the biggest one being South Africa, the other 2 being Nigeria, Kenya, and Egypt. And if you look at those, between the 4 of them, 35% of the GDP comes from those 4 countries. And then the most populous country, just out of interest, is Nigeria. The numbers is always a guesstimate, but around 220 million people, of which 70% are under the age of 30. And I've just noticed we've got the wrong Kenya on the map. I apologize. Then the next perspective one can take is to look at it from a perspective of dominant languages. So I mentioned that there were 3,000 languages. However, if you look at it, there are 3 sort of dominant language groups that you can work with. There's the English-speaking part, there's the French-speaking part, and then there's the Arabic-speaking part in North Africa. And while for many of these, while English or French might be their mother tongue, it might not be their mother tongue. It is typically the language of the up-and-coming, the sort of upwardly mobile. So you'll find that people will educate their children either in French or English because they realize that is the language will unlock doors for them going forward. So you can overcome the complexity around language working with French and English to a large extent. However, you can't completely ignore local language because local language is still what people use to connect. So what you'll often find how people do it is it's in English, but there'll be a phrase or something in local language just for that emotional connection. If you look at it from a culture perspective, you can imagine if there's 3,000 different languages, how many different cultural groups there are. And you have multiple of these different cultural groups within a country. So for example, Nigeria has 250 odd languages just in one country. However, again, there are similarities within the region. So there's certain similarities that you'll find within West Africa. There's certain similarities you'll find in East Africa and again in Southern Africa. The history of the regions often play a key role within those similarities. But then there's also the cultural part that plays a significant role there. And then ultimately, what is really important to remember is within Africa, culture is a very strong feature of someone's individual identity. And I'd argue it's probably a lot stronger than, for example, in Europe. Again, if you look at that from a telco perspective, there are two dominant telcos. So MTN is in 17 countries and Airtel in 14. Then you've also got Vodafone, which is actually Vodacom in a number of countries, but a lot smaller than Airtel and MTN. And again, so if you're looking at partnerships, there's opportunities there. The media landscape, however, is complex, and there's just no way of getting around that. So, in many countries, different regions have their own radio stations and multiple radio stations, individually owned and managed, etc. And added to that, outside of South Africa, there's very limited media data. And as I said, the market is highly fragmented. You've got varying pricing models or variable pricing models. In other words, if two companies go to the same media house, you potentially could get two different prices. So it's really critical in this space to have a local partner. And the other peculiarity is that PR is often paid for. And what I mean by that is if you see an article it could be an article in the paper or on a website, it could be even in the news. Often there are sort of news items that actually are paid for. They're presented completely as news. In other markets, often known as advertorials, but there's no differentiation and there's no indication that it is paid for. Peculiar model, but it does exist. So if we now sort of delve down a bit at a consumer level, the internet is absolutely fueling business opportunities across the continent, especially for your very large youth population. And so as we go into the numbers, you'll see one of the things I'm quite passionate about is, depending on how you look at the numbers, you'll see a different story. So often when it comes to internet subscription, people quote the number of people that do not yet have access. However, if you flip the coin, at the moment, there are 320 million internet users in sub-Saharan Africa. So that's excluding the Arabic-speaking northern part of Africa, which if you compare that to the 300 million in North Africa, quite comparable. But then you've still got 43% of those with coverage who don't yet access the internet. So there's significant upside where you're not going to have that same kind of upside if you were to look at, for example, North Africa. And then again, to highlight the upside, you've got 527 million unique mobile subscribers, and it's expected to rise to 751 by 2030. The youth market is largely self-employed, so 70% are self-employed. Their primary business device is the smartphone, and social media platforms play a critical role in this space. So you'll often find that businesses start and completely exist on Instagram. And just on the side, it's even interesting, you'll find people, if they are searching for a business, they will go to a social media platform such as Instagram first. And the underlying logic is that Google gives me worldwide information. If I want information about my local environment, my country, my community, my city, then people are more likely to use social media. And then linked to that, what you also find is that people's role models are completely self-made millionaires. Now, the interesting exception to this sort of self-employed trend is South Africa, where you have a much higher percentage of people who are actually formally employed. And so it's interesting if you look at how people view the world. The youth in South Africa would aspire to have a job, where in Nigeria, yes, people would like a job, but ultimately their long-term goal is to have their own business. And it's even an interesting dynamic for people who have businesses, because it's hard, small businesses, it's often hard to keep people employed because they prefer to go off and start their own business. And then you've got 8 unicorns, of which 7 are in the fintech startup space. And this is largely driven by Africans solving local problems. And I'm going to give a sort of classic idea of the difference. So in many markets, cash is hugely expensive in terms of managing of cash. So notes being significantly reduced in markets. Even cards, debit and credit cards are, and they often aren't no credit cards, but bank cards are actually quite an expensive part of banking to operate. So what is taking off in many markets is either mobile transactions or just people doing transfers. So a classic experience in my own life is I recently did a transfer from a UK account to a UK account, and they told me I'd have to wait 4 or 5 days for the money to reflect. And I was completely shocked because in Nigeria, I go to a supermarket, I would do a transfer to pay for my groceries, and within seconds it reflects, and we keep moving. So you're a very efficient local financial system based on local requirements. Then looking at entertainment, entertainment is serious business in Africa. So in 2027, Nigeria is forecasted to be the fastest growing entertainment and media market with a compound annual growth rate of 16.5% compared to a global average of 4.4%. And people often challenge the fact because there's this perception that Africa is poor, and there is a lot of data about the limited sort of income that people have. But what is not understood is the choices people make in terms of what to spend the money on. And if there is no, so there's less to spend your money on in terms of some of the big ticket items. However, what really gives quality of life is being able to take your mind off the daily hardships. So spending money on entertainment is often one of the top priorities for people. So Nollywood is the second biggest globally, which is Nigeria's movie industry, and produces 2,500 films in a year. And previously, all of these films used to go out on cassettes. What were those? The good old cassettes. Nowadays, then there was sort of a period where it became harder because it was all streaming platforms, and that has been completely democratized now again with platforms such as YouTube. So the industry is picking up again significantly. If you look at mobile consumption, mobile phones is the first place that people turn to for entertainment. And yet, because again, income is something that people are always conscious of, data and managing their data consumption. So they've got various different approaches to actually conserve data. So people often would download something. You have a lot of P2P sharing, and there's often many of these apps and streaming platforms have low data modes, and people would use that as well. And then also just again, to give an idea of the market, is 84% of young adults, so 16 to 25 years old in South Africa use smartphones. And in Nigeria, it's 52% and 58% in Kenya. Then you've got 580 million OTT users, or forecasted OTT users by 2029. And the telcos are really actively driving the growth of online video, again, looking at their own bottom line. And what's really interesting is how the nature of data bundles and how it varies between different markets, how that affects consumption. So, for example, if you had to look at Kenya, Kenya has quite a high consumption of video content, and that is driven by the fact that their data bundles from the sort of onset have been sold as daily bundles. So it becomes a way of budgeting. If I deplete my daily bundle today because I've watched video, it's fine because I have a new bundle tomorrow, so I'm okay. Whereas if you look at a market such as Nigeria, where a lot of the consumption is still monthly, if I deplete my data bundle by the middle of the month, I'm stuck with for the rest of the month because I don't have data, if I don't have sort of additional money to buy again. So yeah, that also plays a key role. Then my next question, which brand do you think is the top selling phone brand in Africa? Six options on the screen. I look forward to your answers in the chat. Marie, I need you to guess too. We've got Techno, Nokia, Techno. Yep. So interestingly, Nokia, yeah, Infinix as well. Thank you. Interestingly, Nokia used to completely dominate the market. And then there was a swing towards techno. And and the reason for that is techno went and they came and they really understood the local market. And there were various changes that were made to the phone. Battery life was one of the things that was a really important feature. So they improved the battery life of the phone. The other critical feature on a phone actually is the camera. And they enhanced the camera. And I have been told that one of the key enhancements that they made was that the Techno phone, especially at then, all brands have improved on that. Techno phones were much better at taking photographs of dark people who absorb light versus lighter skinned people who reflect light. So all of that resulted in the swing towards techno. Thank you. Over to you, Buki.
Thank you, Barene. All right, so my shift now. So this lovely man you can see on your screen, for those who don't know him, is a gentleman called Aliko Dangote. He, depending on who you listen to, is the richest man in Africa or the second richest man in Africa. His net worth is somewhere between $11 billion and $27 billion, depending on what sources you follow. And this is his quote. This is essentially, Aliko Dangote needs to have 35 different visas to move around in Africa. And versus, for instance, his French counterparts, because in this particular way, he made the quote was discussing in a business forum with some French partners. Now, this is the same even with British companies, because I know we're talking at the Ukie session today. But the reason why I'm bringing this up is because when doing business on the continent, for us, as an example, going from country to country might be a little bit difficult depending. But for yourselves, it is better trying to do business on the continent because you have a lot more access, which, yeah, it is what it is. But from your perspective, it's good. But the other side, though, actually is also to give you some context about what people go through trying to, for instance, if you had a partner on the continent and you were trying to have a business meeting, let's say at Gamescom. So let me use the example of a few months ago at Gamescom this year, where there was an African delegation of about 12 studios. And apart from one or two people who had foreign passports, every other delegate from different African countries, Kenya, Cote d'Ivoire, Cameroon, Nigeria, South Africa, we all had a nightmare trying to get visas. So that's everything from getting the appointments to get the visa, whether it gets issued in time, whether you need to call in favors, all that, which is something that typically you won't be used to, or you're unlikely to be used to, being UK studios. But it's important to understand in case, you have a partner and the person kind of mentions that, oh, there's a process or there's something they need to get to be able to come into Europe, because it's normally, in a lot of cases that we've dealt with, it's not as common for people to understand that perspective. For instance, in Nigeria at the moment, to apply for a fresh US visa, like if you don't currently have a US visa or haven't had one in the last 2 years, you can't get a date for a year at least. That is how far in advance you need to get ready. But it's just for context to give you, some context for when you're dealing with partners on the continent. Right, so we're going to get into a little bit more of the nuances in terms of consumer behavior, just how companies or brands have tried to navigate coming into the market. So Netflix in Nigeria is cheaper than Netflix in South Africa. So Netflix in Nigeria is circa £3 for premium monthly. For South Africa, it's about double that, about £6 monthly for premium. In the UK, it is £17.99. So I'm quite happy, to be in Nigeria at £3. This is true also for Spotify, for Apple Music, etc., etc. So it's as studios and also in kind of thinking about pricing or when you're coming to the market, it's something to consider. Now, working from the left to the right, when we're talking about earning and affordability, how much you earn, should that always affect your purchasing power? Generally, economists would tell you, yeah, for sure. But in Africa, it actually depends. And it depends on a few things. So whilst, 4 out of 10 Nigerians may live on a daily rate of $1, or on average, 85% of Africans live on less than $6 a day. It depends, because smartphones, for instance, will therefore not be a luxury, because you may not have a PC to do anything on. You may not have a PlayStation or an Xbox to do stuff on. So your smartphone or your phone becomes your utility, it becomes your means of survival, it becomes your means of earning, it becomes your television, it becomes a whole lot of things. So it's no longer, it shifts from being a nice to have to a definitely must have because of X, Y, or Z. So that's a way to kind of look at it. The other thing, for instance, which some of the platforms have been discussing with some global partners, is that when you're thinking about gems and things in games. So for instance, if 100 gems would cost 2,000 naira, for example, it might be worth also doing 10 gems for 200 naira, which you don't lose the value, but it's more accessible for people to buy, because also understanding that in some markets, and a lot of African markets, the daily rate or the not monthly, like Barene has mentioned, not the monthly revenue or earning system or cycle is what obtains. So it's worth also thinking about your pricing structure and breaking some of those things down in terms of things within the game. And we've seen some examples of this, and I'll show those later. The second point is, is illiteracy a barrier to tech adoption? It's strange, because when I Googled this, the answer was yes. And then I think about babies or toddlers who operate our phones, and I'm like, surely, that doesn't sound right. So in Nigeria and in a lot of African countries, this will be true, because since WhatsApp, since social media, where you can communicate with images, with voice notes, and with video and stuff like that, it makes a world of difference, because you no longer need to type to be able to do that. So a lot of people, in going about their business or their earning, use technology as a barrier for that, or as a point for that. So we're seeing more people using technology, and it's not necessarily a factor whether they're literate or not. And the last point, I just thought to mention this, is just some things that we may not be as aware of here. So, for instance, I assume if you wanted to buy your PlayStation Plus, you literally don't think about it. It's a frictionless process. You just kind of, either go to a store or go online and just buy it, right? It's tough to do that here. I buy my PlayStation Plus, or well, I don't buy it. My brother in the US buys it for me, and then I put it on my console in Nigeria. That is also because from a payment structure perspective, some of the global platforms, Xbox, PlayStation, don't have local payments integrated. So you can't, Nintendo is like, don't even go there. You can't buy anything on Nintendo. This today, actually, I got a coupon or a token, a code, sorry. Yes, I wanted to redeem a code, and because my country stated Nigeria, I wasn't allowed to do it. I had to change my country to a different country, to the UK. So right now, in my current Nintendo account, I'm in the UK to be able to redeem my code. So they're just things that you would normally not experience, and it's important to understand this context. Things like developing for console. So we get questions like from some of our community here, why can't we develop for consoles? It's not that we can't. Obviously, there's a steep learning curve, of course. But apart from that, Xbox is a good example. Xbox has had a global incubation manager in Africa for the last 2 years. And his job has been to try to get more game developers developing to release on Xbox. Now, even with that, even with even after they've selected the studios they want to partner with, it takes at least 6 months to get the dev kits to those studios, right? Which is and that's the list is taken for the people who have received it on the continent. So it's also worth thinking about that there are just some barriers that are there and may not be in other countries in games. Steam is another example, and we've been having conversations with Steam about this for the last 2 years. So as a studio in Nigeria, I'm trying to release the game on Steam. I just can't, because Nigeria is not one of the countries that can be selected. And they use a third party for verification, and the feedback from the third party to them is, yeah, we can't verify people in Nigeria. But I don't think that's true, because we do Google payments, we do Dunes and Bradstreet, we do other ways. There are other ways of verification, but essentially, these things just exist, yeah? And a number of apps have been pulled off the App Store. I'm sure this happens in and outside of the continent as well, but these are things that game developers or studios experience on the continent. But even with that, though, Africa is still, a mobile-first gaming market. South Africa being the largest market, then Nigeria, and so on. In terms of top grossing games, this you probably know, but yes, it is Candy Crush. Yes, it is. It's the same. I'm sure if you check your mobile markets as well, it might be exactly the same in your market. So Candy Crush and similar games like, gem matching, those kinds of things are quite big for players on the continent. So this is the top 3 markets on the continent. First-person shooter games like Call of Duty Mobile are also huge. PUBG Mobile is a Tencent game, which is huge here, actually. And it had kind of gained a lot of ground before the Call of Duty Mobile release. Free Fire is similar somewhat to Fortnite as well. It's quite popular. eFootball is also much bigger than EAFC on mobile, for example. Then you have, obviously, Roblox, of course, Coin Master, Gardenscape, Township, those kinds of games are also in the top 10, top 12 high grossing. So these are not just free to play, this is just high grossing games. The other thing to kind of think about when you think about Africa for your games is, offline mode, because obviously, based on some of the things that Barene has also explained, and Marie, data bundles and access are what they are. And so when you download a game, to be able to play offline is important. So that's something to pay attention to as well. Mobile access here, we all know that, no need to belabor mobile, but the point I wanted to make about this is here, most under 18-year-olds may not own their own phones, but like other teenagers across the world, they have access mostly to someone who has a smartphone. And this is across different socioeconomic groups. It's not just the A's and B ones. All right, but as we progress, what is important when you're thinking about markets to expand into is, how viable is this market? And from a commercial perspective, Africa is bankable, and we're bankable on so many levels. I'm sure some of you on this call might have on your playlist, on your Spotify playlist or Apple Music playlist, have some Burna Boy music, or some Thames, some Wizkid music, those kinds of things, Rema, all those kinds of people. So the culture is actually really, really popular now. And it's been like that for a few years. At the top right of the screen is the book, Children of Blood and Bone, which is a trilogy and has, the rights have been bought by Paramount Plus and is in development for a blockbuster movie. So there's a lot of the whole transmedia thing also happening with African IP, etc. So it's worth kind of like thinking about collaborations with local partners as an example of existing IP, or just even introducing certain African or elements or characters into your existing franchise as an example. The bottom right image is a Netflix film called The Black Book. It's a Nigerian film, actually. The director's first movie. And he made the film with $1 million, which is really expensive for a Nigerian film. But he hit across the world. It was top three in all Netflix markets. So this is just to say that the fact that the film is Nigerian, it's shot in Nigeria, it's based around or themed around Nigeria and all those kinds of things. It has global appeal is the point. So it's, the culture can make money. Through the next few slides, I'm just going to touch on things we're starting to see just in terms of how culture collaborations are happening or how games industries are entering the continent or starting to dip their toes in the water, if you will. So this is Games First 2024. So for the first time, at least I think it was the first time, Supercell had an open call to get 10 studios from the global south to come for Games First, fully funded by Supercell. And out of the lists, I think 5 out of 10 of them were from Africa. And so the picture on the left is, there are a few studios. Maliyo is also here represented by Hugo, and a few others there. But the point being, Supercell is starting to engage with the continent in terms of access, exposure, and testing out, what maybe can be, or what's, at the moment, we obviously don't know why they're doing it yet, but it's early signs of exploration with the continent. Also, they have, so Carry First, I don't think that's come up, is an African, publisher. And what you find is quite a lot of the global platforms use them for fulfillment or for partnerships in terms of distribution on the continent. So Supercell also, you can buy certain things that are related to Supercell games through Carry First. This is Disney's Iwaju. So Disney, a few years ago now, although it came out last year, it came out this year, bought into a Nigerian IP called Iwaju from a Nigerian animation studio called Kugali. So the top right is, the series. So they had a series of an animation series called Iwaju that was launched this year. As part of that, on the other side, they created a game to support or to promote the series as well, called Iwaju Rising Chef, which was also made by Maliyo Games. And it's around African or Nigerian food specifically as well. So whilst I'm not going to play it for too long, I'll just show you a little bit of a few seconds of the trailer.
From Disney Animation and the groundbreaking storytellers of Kugali.
Happy birthday, Tola. This is Oti. You want stars for a pet?
It's great.
Comes a Disney Plus limited series.
What would you say if I asked you to go to the mainland?
Set in a futuristic Nigeria.
You want to see the real Lagos?
Yes, let's go.
Welcome to Lagos, Nigeria.
All right. If you want to catch a bit more of Iwaju, it's released already. All right. In 2022, Wakanda Forever, which was the second part in the franchise, had the Africa premiere in Lagos. It was huge. Obviously, the cast was in Lagos. The whole point being, I suppose, a few years ago, this wouldn't have happened. They launched or had this premiere at Africa International Film Festival. And I suppose it was more like a nod to the Nollywood industry and, how much impact Nigerian film culture is also affecting the global industry and vice versa. So these kinds of things are the things that have been happening over the last few years that make us know that, collaboration with African culture or just even collaborating with the continent in certain markets is useful and can be quite lucrative and commercial in nature as well. A few years ago, which is a while ago actually, Gameloft signed a deal with MTN to distribute on the platform, or MTN is one of the telcos that Barry mentioned earlier. And so you can have access to play Gameloft games for a fixed price or on a particular bundle on MTN, etc. But more recently, so that's an old kind of, the left side is something that happened in the past. On the right side are the things that have happened over the last, 12 to 18 months. So at the top is a PUBG Mobile Campus Championship. This happened for the first time in Nigeria this month, actually. It's the first time, so Tencent noticed, like we saw in the data, that a lot of Nigerians play PUBG Mobile. And obviously because of the scale of the market, and they did a similar thing in India, trying to increase consumer engagement and build more following. And that was hugely successful in that approach. So they're trying or trialing the same thing in Nigeria to try to get more community engagement involved and then scale the game a lot more than it currently is, though it's one of the biggest mobile games played in Nigeria. So that's one of the things that we're starting to see a bit more of. Xbox Game Camp Africa started last year. So they've done 2 editions of that happens July every year in 4 key African markets. It's a virtual event. It's a hybrid in most of the cities. But essentially Xbox is taking an approach to upskill game developers in a way that they can compete by making their own IP, but also contribute to a larger global marketplace. All right, so having heard all this, what do you recommend or what should you think about as Ukie Studios? So the first thing, clearly, if you want to get new publishers, a lot of studios, I know Monument Valley 3 is being released or distributed through Netflix games as well. So we're seeing kind of like that bit of migration, Football Manager, and a few others actually coming through Netflix games. But there are also African partners that you could work with for distribution. There's Garastore and there's Carry First that we mentioned earlier. So that's one thing, or one thing that can be done. The other is, just like we've mentioned, the audience is nuanced. So localizing your marketing effort makes a world of difference in trying to build following or just improve the growth of your game. So it's more effective and it can be more efficient. So having a partner that understands games and the African markets will be useful. And last but not least, we've spoken about the population of the continent, the youthful nature. We've spoken about the culture, the creativity. We've spoken about some of the technical skills that we have. For instance, in Nigeria, every single year, over 700,000 students leave university. A lot of those are technical courses, arts, and obviously some commercial courses as well, but it's huge. So in thinking about how else Ukie Studios can collaborate on the continent, clearly there's an argument for co-development, whether that is, introducing, like we're saying, elements from culture into your game, or just starting afresh, working on a project co-creatively with another studio, or outsourcing. And for outsourcing, language isn't a barrier, relatively the same time zone. We have an existing pool of technical talent. We have successful adjacent industries like film, like music, like animation. So it's pretty much a good market to outsource into from a win-win point of view, though, not just because it might be cheaper, but also because there's a lot that the workforce can gain from learning from Ukie Studios as an example, but also like with all the things we explained, there's a lot of bankable elements actually that can coexist together. So it's worth thinking about. Last but not least, when thinking about coming to the continent, there are ecosystem events you probably should consider. So one is Africa Games Week that starts, which Marie mentioned earlier, starts end of this month in Cape Town. And there's Lagos Games Week that happens in Lagos. It will be in its second year, May every year. To summarize, top English GDP economies on the continent are South Africa, Nigeria, and Kenya. Our audiences are nuanced. Language matters, but not, like we think. It's simpler, but nuanced. Think differently, but respect the market. Think about the pricing model that I was talking about with Netflix, for example, or the way to structure gems and things like that based on affordability, etc. Those kinds of things will not only make your games present, but also accessible. In addition to working with a good publisher, find a local partner to help with your marketing strategy. You have on the continent, obviously Tencent is doing a bit on the continent. They've been doing a bit in South Africa for a while, but now trying to get into Nigeria. You have the French government also quite involved on the continent, and so on and so forth. You have people like Xbox as well, big studios, 343, getting quite involved as well on the continent. So those kinds of initiatives are starting to happen. So it's a good time actually for Ukie studios to be thinking about the continent and acting on it. And last but not least, Africa is open for business, but you need to find the right partner and find the right opportunities. All right, so thank you so much for the session. It's been great, spending this time with you. And if you want to discuss your business or any thought you have around coming to the continent, please feel free to send me an email to book a free 30-minute consultation. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Bukola and Barene. I really appreciate it. That was really, really interesting, very insightful indeed. We do have a question from Eduardo in the chat. How is this in relation to Brazil? We share a language and other similarities. I'll be completely honest with you, Brazil will be largely filled in tomorrow at around 2:30 in the afternoon. But I don't know if Bukola or Barene want to sort of comment.
Yes. So how are we different from Brazil? So Brazil, in terms of, obviously, the games industry in Brazil is a lot more advanced than ours. So it's a much larger games market. So that's one. It is also largely mobile as well. But the main difference really is the primary language is Portuguese. So you need to do some level of localization. We actually had, strange, last week we had the Sao Paulo government team in our office here in Lagos because they were on the back of Africa International Film Festival. Kind of also thinking about collaborations with the Nigerian market as well. So, but it's in terms of market size, currently it's much bigger than Nigeria. But as a continent, though, I would argue for it doesn't have to be one or the other, but if you work in the three critical African markets, the size would definitely match up, and it will be in English.
Wonderful. Yeah, Eduardo, definitely pop along to the Brazil session tomorrow. Like I say, starting at 2:30 in the afternoon here in the UK. Got an awful lot of speakers lined up for the Brazilian session, so it'll be a long busy day. Any other questions at all? This is our last session of today. Okay, that's absolutely fine. What we'll do, obviously, Bukola, you shared your email address there, but if anyone has any sort of questions, Bukola, are you happy to pop your email in the chat? Is that all right? And we've got a question from Matt on the landscape of publishers on the continent. I mean, from my perspective, Carry First, obviously. Bukola, I don't know if you want to sort of talk a little bit more about Carry First, because they're quite an important case, really, aren't they?
Yes, they are. But Marie, do you want to? Are you?
Yeah, I think Carry First is the giant in this market. I think they are the publisher of note in the African market, and they're part of distributors as well. So if you're looking at Africa publishers, you're talking about them. But they are smaller, more localized players, but the regional giant is there.
Yeah, so yeah, what Marie said, just in case, is that Carry First is also okay, cool. So you heard. Okay. Thank you. Barene, did you want to answer something? Okay.
Oh, is there another one? Are there any local ones of note? I think yeah, I think that's probably the long and short of it. Africa is actually quite a small market. As I've mentioned, it's an emerging ecosystem, and if you look at the major players, you have some very local players. For example, Kenny Games in Ethiopia, which is also a publisher in its own right, that is just largely pushing out games in Amharic. And then you have regional giants and studios such as ourselves that are putting out content in English. But an outfit like Carry First doesn't quite exist in other markets across in a smaller scale, if you know what I mean. So they cover the long and short of the publishing market.
Yeah, so yeah, but also, well, they're not publishers, but on the continent, there might also be an approach with telcos as a distribution channel.
Yes, telcos are big. Like Safaricom here does a lot of game distribution. So that's another one.
The telco thing is quite interesting, really. I don't know personally of any other sort of regions that sort of rely on that existing sort of network to sort of piggyback off the back of, really. Out of curiosity, do you guys know anywhere else that's doing a similar thing?
I don't. It's actually a conversation I was having sometime yesterday, or was it earlier today, to try to, because it's not actually quite normal. Yeah, you're absolutely right. The players are so different. Apart from obviously Tencent, who is a telco turned, a conglomerate. It almost feels like a no-brainer. They have millions, tens of millions, or hundreds of millions of customers. Yeah, but I don't know of any other market that would be similar.
Very interesting. Yeah, a huge captive audience ultimately. Okay, fantastic. Well, if anyone has any other questions after the fact, obviously feel free to drop me a message or drop Bukola a message, and I can put you in touch as well. Equally, more than happy to do that. But otherwise, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you as well to each of our presenters. It's been really, really interesting. And thank you so much for giving up your day and coming along. I really appreciate it.